Hello, my friends. On today's episode, we are going to unravel the complex dance between expectation and artistic expression with my dear friend, colleague, BAM graduate, creativity coach, Sarah Cook. Together, we are going to navigate the delicate equilibrium of creativity and business. We'll dissect the challenge of preserving the sanctity of art while running our businesses. I hope that this conversation can be a compass in reclaiming the joy of creativity, of delving into the principles of anti-extractivism and the beauty of a dynamic partnership with our creative selves. Sarah's insights promise a wealth of knowledge for not just artists and entrepreneurs, but for anyone who's seeking a deeper connection with their creative spirit. This episode is a tapestry that's woven with personal anecdotes, and I share my relationship to the constant evolution of my own creativity, of the pressure that I felt from generational expectations to the transformative power of aligning my work with my identity. And as you listen, I hope that you can contemplate the significance of the words that we choose and how terms like reciprocity can reshape our understanding of productivity. These narratives guide us to foster a creative practice that's not only a source of income, but a wellspring of personal fulfillment. One of the fun things that I actually really enjoyed about this conversation is that Sarah kind of calls me out on my stuff. And so I hope that you are able to listen to that with a bit of a smile on your heart, because that's definitely how I received it. And I absolutely, absolutely cherish those relationships where they're not afraid to say, hey, you might have contradicted yourself there. And how can we unpack that? What does that actually mean for you? Because there's a contradiction that we want to explore. So, Sarah is a neurodivergent writer, poet, and creativity coach. She specializes in helping people reclaim their creative agency so they can make with more ease and enchantment. And she writes a Substack that I absolutely love. It's called For the Birds, and it is a newsletter about resilience, the writing life, and the natural world. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation that I had with Sarah. Hello, my friends. We get to hang out with Sarah Cook today, and she is a creativity coach, and she is somebody who has an unusual place in my life. I was just sending you a message was that just last night that I sent you that message? I think it was.
Yeah, like less than 24 hours ago.
Yeah. What is time? um, So Sarah is an unusual person in my life because she came in through Business Alchemist mentorship, and she has sort of like bridged lots of different realms of now being a collaborator. I attend a lot of her creativity resilience circles. I have plans to, fingers crossed, write something bigger than a Instagram post at some point in my life, potentially a book. And when that happens, I know that Sarah's going to help me doula that into the world. I'm just not quite there yet. And so I was just reflecting, apparently yesterday, that I'm just so grateful when I get to have these people in my life where we are able to flexibly move through these different roles and hold boundaries in a way that feels expansive and really honors each of our own sort of space holding capacities. And so today I have asked Sarah to come on to our program and chat with us about creativity, partially because I feel kind of like weird saying this out loud, but as somebody who like looks at everything through a relational lens, I think you were the first person who it like actually clicked for me when you were like, you can have a relationship with your creativity. And I was like, what? Hell yeah, of course. So yeah, thank you for giving my creativity um, a body, a voice, a bit of a sassy voice. Um,
Mm.
and and then I've also asked her to come and teach a workshop for my community. And so if you're listening to this before March 13th, 2024, you can come join us live. We're going to be meeting at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The concept around the workshop is called Partnering with Your Creativity. And even if you're listening to this after that date, you won't be able to join us live because at this point we can't really time travel. But
Yes.
you can you can download the recording, and I'm really really excited to have her on the show, have her teach within my community, and continue to promote your work, Sarah. So welcome.
Mhm. What an intro. I love being an unusual person in people's lives. That's like a great role in my mind. And also, I really appreciate your candidness around like the sort of tension maybe around that metaphor of like having a relationship with your creativity and the way it needed to like click, and then it clicked in a really big way for you, because you might recall I also had initially kind of struggled. Struggle's too strong of a word, but like the idea of being in relationship with my business felt
Mm.
very, very, very abstract to me for a very long time. And I think it wasn't until after BAM that I sent you like a very long voice note, and I was
I
like, oh
remember.
my God, I get it. I get it. Like it all, like it didn't click. And then when it clicked, it has now like stayed clicked in the
Mm.
depths of my soul in such an important way. So I like the sort of like mirroring that's happened for each of us.
Oh, I love it. I'd forgotten about that moment for you, and just like that, I just remember, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but I just remember the like excitement that you felt to like feel this sort of tangible relationship to your
Yeah.
business. And um in a way I feel like I'm still starting to reestablish that with my creativity. I don't feel like I'm like searching for it in the
Mm-hmm.
same way, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that relationships are all different, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
haven't gotten the click, as you call it. For
Mm-hmm.
me, even when I fell in love with my husband, it was this like slow, the light is turning up in the room kind of a sensation. Um and so I feel like it's similar with my creativity personally. It's not this like lightning bolt, lock
Yeah.
eyes from across the room, and like now I get you sort of a feeling. It's more of a like let's feel each other out, and like let's see what this is and what's actually here.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're like comparing it to this very important relationship of yours, because that to me is demonstrating the way you're engaging with it in this like very relational way, right? And even this idea that you could be okay having expectations of your creativity that are slower, that where you're like not worried, like what you just said, I don't hear any worry in you, at
Mm-hmm.
least that you're expressing, that it hasn't clicked
Mm-hmm.
yet. It sounds like you just kind of know, oh, yeah, there's a thing that's unfolding. I'm like heading there slowly. I think that's how a lot of good things function.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that's great.
Can we dive into expectations just because you kind of brought that up? Um,
Yeah.
I think part of the struggle that I have with creativity, and I think that this is probably a common theme for a lot of spiritual entrepreneurs, is that because our work is so creative, you can't deny that, coming up with curriculum isn't creative. Like,
Hmm.
creating workshops, putting writing out there, putting even like, I think about social media as this like new strange art form.
Hmm.
There's really beautiful like pieces that people create, and just because you put it up in the digital space doesn't mean that it's no less creative. And as a spiritual entrepreneur whose creativity is tied to your income, is tied to um like a tangible output,
Hmm.
how do you manage that dynamic of having expectations of your creativity, but then also giving it like a loose enough leash that it doesn't feel stifled and it then doesn't become this like transactional
Mhm.
relationship.
Mm. Excuse me. Um, yeah, I mean, I think this is why. So, something often that happens when I have like a new client who finds me, a lot of folks come to me for a lot of different reasons, but a very common one is they have a book that they're wanting to write. And they come to me and they have this project. And one of the first things I will ask them is, okay, what other creative things do you work on other than this book or other than this project? And sometimes people have answers to that and sometimes they don't. And I'm always a huge advocate that people have other routes in which they're engaging with their creativity and working on things, and even writing, even within the world of writing, like all of your writing, I'm going to say, shouldn't be, funneled into the book or this external facing thing, because I think that creates a kind of pressure that sets us up to have like unfair expectations of our creativity. I think we have to
Mm-hmm.
be tending it in ways that are not public facing and in ways that are just private. And that is not to say, I mean, sometimes I'm working on something and it becomes a public facing thing or it finds its way into a newsletter, right? These aren't hard and fast boundaries, but I just think it's sort of like, a healthy ecosystem is one that's diverse. Like, we need diverse expressions of our creativity, even if they're all within the same genre or medium. I just think we have to be tending it in multiple ways, because that like need for play and experiment, like those things are going to look different in the context of paying my bills every month and needing to think about certain things, needing to be discerning about what I'm creating. And so it feels sort of unfair to our creative channel to only tend it within like a business or an external facing context.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like
Mm-hmm.
too much pressure on it.
Yeah. Hearing you say all that aloud, I feel like there's like something tingly happening with like an inner teenager, inner child, because I think so many, well, I shouldn't say so many of us, I'll just sort of speak for myself and my own experience of sort of being trained to only put an effort if it's going to have some sort of like payoff at the end. You
Mm,
know,
mm-hmm.
I think growing up, it was very much, and I think this is a bit of a generational thing, and I think it's actually gotten worse with this more recent generation
Yeah.
of like you go to kindergarten to get into the good grade school, which then gets you to the good like high school, which then you have to do, you know, cross off all your T's and do all the extracurriculars in order to get to the good college. And, I feel like there was like even with the things that I absolutely loved, like I was in okay, so this is like super nerdy version of me, but I'm gonna own it. I was part of the like Future Farmers of America club when I was in
Aw,
high school, and we
bless you.
raised like sheep and cows, and it's like truly something that I loved. And obviously it's something that I continue to love because I want to, be a farmer. I'm like an aspiring farmer. But like even with that, it was like, oh, you're doing this. At least the message that I got from my parents was this like, oh, you're doing this so that you can put that down as like good extracurricular activity, which will then help you get into a good school. Or, a lot of the volunteer work that I was doing around that time was also around, volunteering in veterinary clinics and volunteering in hospitals, and all that was like just to like rack up the like point total to like
Mm-hmm.
get to the thing. And it always felt like it was like, oh, like then that's going to get you to the next thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. There was never this idea of like, hey, like you can just do that thing just because it simply brings you joy, which is kind of what I'm hearing with you.
Yeah.
So it was always this like idea of like always be doing something to get to the next thing.
Mm,
And even just you naming, hey, like you can just do a thing, even if it's writing, and even if your craft that you do sort of put out there publicly is writing, you are still allowed to write for the sake of writing, write for
mhm.
the joy of writing, or pursue other creative practices that like are completely outside of writing just for the hell of it because it brings you
Yeah,
joy.
yeah,
um and there's like a part of my like inner teenager that's I don't know, like it's not something that I've like, it's something that I've heard before, but I think I'm getting like another click of it here as we're sort of speaking this out.
yeah. Yeah, it's so hard. And it's really why, like, I just think everything comes back to the importance of having an anti capitalist lens for things, right? Because what we're talking about is like value. Like, that can things be valuable outside of having a use value, outside of like earning us profit, outside of counting or not counting toward our productivity, right? We're talking
Mm-hmm.
about just like pleasure and creative experience that isn't necessarily always tied to a creative product.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think for anyone who like has a really hard time leaning into that feeling of just doing something creative for the joy of it, right? Because I know that can feel really sticky, right? Because these messages are old and they're also everywhere. And so we're like constantly having to swim upstream to like give ourselves permission to do something that isn't productive or that is private or that won't go on our social media, right? So I get that that's hard. I wonder for those of us who already have like a strong sense of being really like anti-capitalist in our practices, if we can like harness some of that in order to tend like a different and more robust relationship with our creativity, right? Because I might feel like, well, I'm definitely anti-capitalist in my practices and my business and my entrepreneurship, but ooh, I have a hard time creating just for myself. But if I think of that as
Mm-hmm.
part of that anti-capitalist practice, that could create a different door into that house, right? Like that could
Mm-hmm.
create a different like way to play around with that idea if it feels really tricky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think what you're bringing up for me is, you know, of course, everything is a spiritual practice. At least that's how I sort of view things. And, I've said this many times before where it's like, oh, yeah, the reason why business is a spiritual practice is because all the things that you thought you worked on outside of business, attachment stuff,
Hmm.
hey, you get into business and now here's another way to like learn that thing again. And what I'm hearing you say is, at least the reflection back to me is like, I have done a lot of work around being anti-extractivist and, creating ethical business practices and really looking at sort of my own place in the like consumer cycle. Um,
Hmm.
and because there isn't like, mm, because there isn't like money tied to my creativity, at least not
Hmm.
in the like sort of like super direct sense of the word. Like I'm not an artist that is now like creating something that people are wanting to purchase that's like a tangible thing.
Hmm.
um like I'm seeing this now as like, oh, here's another place where you can actually do that anti-extractivist work,
Hmm.
um in a different sort of playground, in a different sort of arena.
Hmm. Yeah. And I just want to like stay with what you just said a tiny bit longer because I feel like what we're talking about, there's like two pieces of it that are just as important. And the one is, yes, you don't need to have anything financial tied to your creativity for it to be worthwhile. Period.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Like, and I kind of want to challenge what you just said about your creativity not tied to your income, because that when you say that word artist, I know what you mean. And even that though, I see a lot of people who are doing very creative things, but we have this idea of like the fine arts in our mind. Like you're writing
Mm-hmm.
a novel or poetry, or you're taking fancy black and white photographs, or you're painting with like oil or watercolors, and that counts as being an artist. Like I'm really curious about what a modern inclusive definition of artist might look like,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Mm-hmm.
can't help but, and I'm saying this as your friend, as someone who has received mentorship and coaching from you, as someone who's talked with you about creativity many, many times, I don't know that I believe you when you say your creativity is not tied to your income.
Yeah, well, thank you for calling that out because I'm realizing even just in this conversation, I've contradicted myself because I said exactly the opposite at the very beginning, which then, like, shows you how this, like, push-pull dynamic that I'm having with my own creativity, um, in that relationship doesn't always feel, um, like it's got super clear boundaries. Like, it has, you know, the same sort of relationship that I have with my business. Like there's this like deep trust that I have in my business that like even when it ebbs, it will eventually flow. I don't think
Yeah.
I have the same kind of relationship with creativity. And so then it makes these sort of like concepts and definitions that I place around creativity a little bit murky and sometimes like malleable. And so I really appreciate you being like,
Yeah.
hey, like that's not actually true, is it?
Said with love, said with love. Yeah. Well, and what I love about this conversation is I think it's so important too that we just like model and normalize that push pull. Like whether we're talking about creativity or whether we're talking about business, or I'm sure there are other topics we could be talking about too. I think that push pull is such an organic part of like reclaiming something on our own terms,
Hmm.
right? You are in the business of helping people like reclaim their skills, their entrepreneurship, their desire to serve others like on their own terms, right?
Hmm.
Spiritually, professionally, personally, all those things. So I think that is true, can be true with our creativity too, right? Like we need to sort of reclaim it from these terms that we've inherited or and learned and you know picked up in classroom spaces that weren't actually very nurturing, all that stuff. And I think that push pull is so normal and okay. I don't think these things are just like light switches that we can just turn on and now I feel better about my creativity and we're happily ever after. Like there's going to be the
Hmm.
like expansion and contraction, right? Like a
Hmm.
nervous
Hmm.
system.
Hmm. Hmm. It's so funny as you were speaking, and this is going to come off a little bit crass. Um, I feel like the voice of my creativity was piping up and saying, I don't want to be prostituted anymore.
Mm,
Um, and as I'm like tracking it, it's like I do have a history of turning my creativity into an extractivist thing.
yeah.
Um, before, you know, one of the very first businesses that I opened up was as a calligraphy artist.
Mm,
And I used to do like envelopes for weddings and birthday parties. And um, I also used to write people's like wedding vows up in like really beautiful script and
mm,
uh, create art pieces of people's favorite poems. And it was really fun and beautiful in the beginning. Um, but eventually it turned into this thing where it felt very technical and mechanical and
mhm.
like almost like I had like sort of sucked the creativity out of it because it was no longer this like co-creative process with creativity. It was this like people are hiring me to do the thing and then I push out the thing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, again, like full transparency and vulnerability here, like modeling, like I think that there is a little bit of a fear here of, is this beautiful thing that I love, which is business coaching. And I do think that there's a lot of creativity sort of infused in the way that I look at businesses and
Mhm.
look at how we, put them in relationship to our bodies and nature and all that stuff. The last thing I would want to do is to like turn that into a thing that feels like my calligraphy business.
Mm.
And I don't think I'm anywhere close to that, but I'm sort of like tuning into my creativity, and that's one of the things that's coming through in this conversation
Mm.
is this fear of, but this is the thing we really love and are super passionate about, and what if we
Mm.
lose that and it turns into a thing that is just churning out numbers, and are you going to
Mm.
protect me from that?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. And I don't even think that messaging that's coming through, it didn't strike me as crass. It feels really accurate and really truthful. And I mean, it sounds like you loved that early business until you didn't.
Hmm.
And I mean, do you feel, can I, so I want to just kind of ask a question about this. Do you feel
Sure.
like you started loving it less because of something that was taking place in the business, or was that just a sort of natural kind of, you know, ebbing
Mm.
away from something?
When I go back to that time in my life, it was when I was in grad school. My calligraphy business actually put me through grad school,
Mm.
um, which is really amazing. And yet, because my expenses were so high during grad school, and it was such an, I want to say, like, quote unquote, easy way to make money.
Mm.
Um, because I could just make my own schedule around it. I could, there was a lot that felt very flexible about it, and it was like a pretty high dollar per hour sort of a job. Um, there was almost this feeling of like I have to, I remember
Mm.
taking on projects at the very end where I was like, oh, I really don't want to do this one. Like,
Mm.
I can go an entire lifetime not hearing or reading um, or listening to an E.E. Cummings poem. Like, I don't know what it is about E.E. Cummings that people freaking love, but
Especially
I,
calligraphy. That's so funny.
yeah, um, where I was like, if I have to write another E.E. Cummings poem again, I'm going to scream. But it was like every time I did that, you know, I was seeing the money hit my account, and I needed the money at the time.
Hmm.
And so it was just this like, I mean, I think it feels accurate to like say that I had a very like
Mm-hmm.
um prostitute slash like madam energy with my
Mm-hmm.
creativity, where I was
Hmm.
the madam and my creativity was the prostitute.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if that answered your question, but yeah.
No, I think it did. And I mean I also hear like, oh, it sounds like, again, if we can stay in this space of seeing your creativity as this thing that you're partnering with, it's like, well, it sounds like that it also like really supported you a lot during that time and did give you some
Hmm.
things that you needed. And then it had a sort of like expiration date for that
Hmm.
particular
Yeah.
manifestation of it. I mean, it kind of, I feel like it's what you're talking about is also bringing up this other thing that feels really important here, which is like our creativity over time necessarily is going to want to show up in different ways. And our enthusiasm for things and our sense of being really devoted to certain practices or certain projects, like that's going to change. And I think those things can end in the same way that like winter ends and we move into a new season, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's grief there, but it's not bad. Like
Mm-hmm.
part of me wants to say like your current enthusiasm and love and devotion for the thing you're doing right now, that's the thing to trust more than anything else. And if that feeling changes or goes away, then that will tell you it's time to look for a different route or to
Yeah.
reassess things, right? But I think you can always trust that
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
enthusiasm. I actually think that figuring out like what are we creatively enthusiastic about is so important to start having this more robust practice with our creativity and to be thinking outside of like, well, what do other people want to see? What could I sell? What could I make money on? Like just being able to notice and know that there are certain creative things that we love and feel
Mm-hmm.
excited about and want to protect. Like giving
Mm-hmm.
that lots of our attention is such
Yeah.
an important practice.
Yeah. And I think too, like when we're talking about it in this way, it's totally true. Like my relationship to, let's just use calligraphy just to continue that theme, has changed completely, where like calligraphy is now something that I do for myself, something that like itches a part of my ADHD brain in a way that nothing else itches. And I have taken on a couple of like commissioned projects from like close friends, and you know to me, when I've taken on those projects, like I feel like I can't take money for those projects.
Mm,
I'm either gifting them or I'm asking them to make a donation, to a charity. Like I'll pick a subject and be like, can you please
mm,
send what you would have sent to me to this
mm.
charity? Because I think that my creative process around calligraphy in particular is so tired of being like used for money. And
Yeah,
so I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can develop different kinds of relationships with each of these things that we do. I would say
hmm,
that like other ways that my creative process flows is, when I work with my horses, or when I'm doing embroidery, or um, playing with watercolors, like.
hmm,
And I feel like each of them kind of has like a different spirit. I don't know if you feel that way
hmm,
as
hmm.
well, where it's like, my creative business partner has a different sort of vibe to like my watercolor creative partner. Um, and that's always sort of like fun to sort of play with, like all those
Yeah,
different flavors of your creativity.
yeah, yeah. And I really just want to take a minute to really highlight what you shared because this this like medium that you originally brought up in this context of, oh, this was like a really extractive creative process for me. I, was doing this calligraphy and charging too much and it felt bad and all the things you shared. You've literally now, like, you only do it for free and for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's amazing. What a healing choice that you've made for this
Mm.
thing. Like, that's really incredible. I feel like in addition to the sassiness of your creativity that was sort of coming up a little bit earlier, like I imagine there's a lot of gratitude there too, because that's like a pretty startling shift.
Mm.
Like it wouldn't surprise me if you said, and I never touched a calligraphy pen ever again, right? But instead you're like, no, 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 you have like shifted and repaired, it sounds like. I mean, I don't know if you'd use that word, but you've really shifted your relationship with that thing. Like that feels like a pro move.
Mm. I mean, I don't know that I've ever shared the story of like my calligraphy creative partner out loud before, and you know, really had a chance to notice. I don't know, it's like one of those things with relationships too, where it's like it's so easy to take that thing for granted, you know?
Mm, mm-hmm.
Um, so thank you for noticing.
Yeah. 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 You know, speaking of taking for granted, like I do think like I have been I think creativity was honestly like one of my first coping mechanisms when I was very, very, very young.
Mm,
I like found the page very young. I have been writing my whole life, and I think if it, coping mechanism makes it sound a little more fraught than I mean to, but I just creativity has been such a part of how I understand my own personhood for so long that I think I can sort of like take for granted that not everybody has that relationship, And so which I think maybe makes me like a good person to be a mentor and a guide in this field, because I'm just like, it's so obvious. Like it's this thing that helps us see ourselves, and we can use it privately, and it can ground us, and it can anchor us, and we can like play with ourselves and reflect on who we are in ways when we're being creative that we're never ever ever going to be able to do in quite the same way anywhere else. um, I think I'm someone who's always been like just really, really clear on that. And
mm,
I think I want to like tie this back into this relationship piece. So I do think for some of us who don't have that relationship established and tend to assume that our creativity has to fit within these boundaries of, what am I using it for? What do I have to show for it? Thinking about profit and productivity and all those things. I do think viewing it as more of a relationship again invites us to think about our creativity and ourselves in the same way that we would a partner or a friend or someone else we're in a relationship with, right? Like we
yeah.
would not go to the other person and just be constantly thinking about what can I get out of this relationship?
Mm,
How can
mm-hmm.
I use this relationship to increase my monthly profits? It invites a sort of like a benefit of the doubt
Yeah.
and more generosity that I think
Yeah.
is really, really necessary.
Yeah. In addition to benefit of the doubt and generosity, I would also add in it brings in accountability. Like,
Mm,
if I'm going to be asking, if we're going to use this as a relationship example, if I'm going to be asking my partner to, you know, do something for me, not in a sort of transactional way, but like in a way that, like, I think I would always be asking myself, like, how can I support you in doing that thing for our team?
mm,
You know,
mm,
like, I guess an actual tangible example of that would be like my husband, who's a bus driver, went through a pretty intensive like commercial drivers like training before he was
mm,
able to be a bus driver.
mm,
And it was like hard for him mentally because he's doing this thing that he's never done before. It was really, really long hours, and he was doing it so that our family's monthly income would increase. And so in a very way there is like a transactional piece of him doing this. But I remember asking myself, like, okay, so if he's going to do this hard thing for our family, what can I do to like help him out? Like, and
mm,
so like
mhm,
packing him lunch, and sometimes he'd be
mm,
really sort of like achy sore, and so I draw him a bath at the end of the day. And I think that if we can all sort of tend to like our you know creative spirits, or the spirit of our business,
mhm,
or again, like, because it's relational, it can apply to anything, I'm even thinking about, can this apply to my garden? Can this apply to my relationship with my dog, my horses? Um, if we are asking the other, um, and even if the other is within ourselves, if we're asking that other to do something that's really hard,
Mm,
I think the devotional practice that we have is, how can I support that hard thing?
mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. It's just reminding me too of like how important the words are that we use, because you're right. What you're describing is a kind of transaction, but that word feels so steeped in the wrong spirit. And the word I just kept thinking every time you said it was, well, it sounds like reciprocity, which
Mm,
feels so different, right?
mm-hmm,
Sometimes when I'm talking with clients about like tasks and we find ourselves talking, like thinking through the framework of productivity, I sometimes want to say, well, let's talk about fruitfulness, not productivity, right? It's like we're still talking about
mm,
making something, but we're just like shifting the quality and maybe inviting in, a little bit more of like a nature inspired relationship to it. I don't know. There's just something about thinking about the reciprocity between us and our creativity that
mm,
feels so much softer and more generous.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, I mean, there's a reason why I ask you to hold so many different roles in my life. And even within the life of BAM, I would say, because you are a student, you're a member of the community. I've also asked you to be the community moderator for the Slack channel. Um, Anybody who joins BAM gets a subsidized creativity reading with you. Like, this is how important I think that, our relationship to creativity is when it comes to our businesses. Um, so, like, I'm curious how you would describe this, like, somewhat polyamorous relationship that we have between ourselves, creativity, and business.
Hmm. That's such a big question. I feel a little intimidated by that question, but I think I actually want to sort of loop back to something I said earlier in the conversation where I kind of alluded to like not understanding for a really long time that I was in relationship with my business. And then when things finally clicked, they clicked in like a really big way. And I don't need to get into all the details of why and how that happened, but the short version of what had happened was I finally realized in a really big way that my business was giving me things. And I don't mean like it's earning me money. Yes, it's doing that, but like my business had created opportunities for me to step out into the world with a kind of confidence that I had never had before. It had created opportunities for me to believe very casually that I was capable of certain things that I had previously never thought that I was capable of. It also, I mean, just to be frank, like it allowed me to work from home during the last year and a half of my cat Boots being alive. And if I had not shifted into becoming self employed, I would have lost so much time with him that I ended up having as a result. Like, these things that like all the things I just named were not things that I said, I'm going to become self employed because then I'm going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. These were things that were created just almost magically as a result of this process and really feel to me like gifts from this relationship that I'm in that yes, I'm stewarding and tending and have been working really hard and all, doing a bunch of things to move in a positive direction, but so many of the things that it's given me I couldn't have anticipated. So
Mm,
there's part of being in relationship with a thing is like also being the recipient of things. And I think that
Mm,
feels really important when we're thinking about creativity too, because we're often thinking about, well, what am I making? What am I producing? And also, frankly, just getting stuck in like what I guess I want to describe as like ego concerns, like, oh, is this idea even good enough? Oh, are these poems good? Like, we get really stuck in like assessing quality. And I feel like when we're talking about our creativity in more of a relational aspect, and we create this opportunity for us to not only be the people who are like in charge and making things and producing things, but we're also receiving things from our creativity.
mm,
It's Again, it's like creating an opportunity to maybe bypass some of that judgment, because it's harder to judge. It's easier to judge when I feel like, well, I'm just sitting down and making something and I hope it's good, right? But when I'm in
yeah.
relationship with something, it's different. It softens things. It creates maybe a little more space for curiosity or a little more space for listening. And if we can just like be in that space with our creativity just for a teeny tiny bit, I think that's when we can very quickly unlock like play and discovery and experimentation and all these things that really need a kind of uncertainty and a kind of
Mm,
openness.
mm,
So,
mhm, mhm, mhm,
yeah,
mhm,
there's something about this shape of, can we see our creativity as a thing that we are the recipients of?
mm.
And that we receive gifts from our creativity, and don't we want to tend that, because oh my goodness, look at the like joy and possibility that it brings into our life. There's something,
Yeah.
I don't know how much or little I answered your question, but uh
No, but it brings back that word reciprocity that you brought up earlier, you know? Um, if we're in you're totally right. Like if we're in any sort of stable, secure relationship with something, there it's not a one-way directional flow.
Mhm,
It is both.
mhm,
And I don't think that we like when it comes to business, I feel like a lot of times if we're looking at it through like the capitalist extractivist model, there's always this like, well, it's got to be paying me back. And we diminish the like really, really beautiful gifts that you just named in terms of being able to show up confidently in spaces that you didn't realize that you could show up in.
mhm,
And
mhm,
like, there's not really a dollar amount that we could put on that. And yet,
mhm,
the business has been the vehicle in order to be able to like steward that
mhm,
in your life, you know? And I think that a lot of times people look at their businesses and say, it's a failing business or it's not doing as well as I want it to be. Because we're only looking at it through this like one tiny marker. And I think that we have a tendency to do that with creativity as well, where
yeah,
we look at it through this like narrow framework of what we can receive from it, and anything outside of that like actual product or anything outside of that like dollar amount that hits our bank account is somehow diminished. And yeah, I'm just sort of like sitting with like this like swimmy feeling of like all the things that
mhm,
I've received from my business and all the things that I've received also from creativity that is so hard. Like, and this is part of the reason why like in BAM we stress like what are your intangible wins as well as your tangible wins. Like we want
mhm.
to be able to name these things that are unnameable. And I feel like that is a act of anti-capitalism. Like that's a revolutionary act to like name the things that are intangible and say that these things also have immense value.
Yeah, yeah. And to be able to celebrate the things that are harder to account for, harder to measure, like harder to show the other person, even, right? Like harder to turn into an Instagram tile, or
Hmm.
harder to, like, yeah, account for in our ledger book, to
Hmm.
just be able to. I mean, there's this sort of like question of like, well, what do you have to show for it, right?
Yeah.
I feel like what we're talking about is like, well, me, I have me to show for it. Like that
Mhm,
has to
mhm.
be, that has to be the starting point. And I think that's, I mean, it sounds like nice and fluffy and maybe like I'm saying that through rose colored glasses, but like I really mean it. Like our create like the way that we can get to know ourselves, create ritual for ourselves, create a kind of like stability of personhood through our for ourselves, but also practice being in uncertainty and experiment. Like we can tap into those things creatively, and I think especially in writing in a way that we just like can't anywhere else. And in
Mhm.
fact, for people who are like still like, but I want something to show for this, it's like, okay, we can have this like really robust relationship with our creativity and build skills that we can then bring to other places in our lives. You know, we can like
Yeah.
hone our quality of attention. A better quality
Mhm.
of attention is only going to serve us as business people as well. You know, we can
Yeah.
like develop new ways for approaching problems. We can like practice being comfortable with things that don't make sense, and then maybe pull a little bit of that into the rest of our life where we're often going to encounter things that don't make sense and are hard because that's just like part of being a human, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's so at the core for me of like just how I move through my days. And I think anybody who is not tending an active relationship with their creativity, it doesn't feel optional to me. It feels like, oh no, you're
Mm.
missing out on something fundamental. I really
Mm.
think that.
Mhm. 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 I love what you just said, and the thing that I'm sort of like, okay, so I'm obsessed with soil right now. Um, because the stage that my farm is at right now is I'm farming soil is sort of how I think about it.
Mm, mm,
And um because everything that I want to do in the future is going to be reliant on the health of the microbiome, the health of the soil, what I put into the soil. Everything is like it just points back to soil. And this is a really big tenet of regenerative farming practices is it's less about, what companion plants are you putting next to each other and what are you growing and what are the conditions. It's like if you can get your soil down, like all the other stuff is going to be easy. And
mm,
so for those
mm.
of us who are saying I still want the thing, you know, like it doesn't diminish that desire because I want to grow my own tomatoes one day. And like if I'm thinking about it realistically, I'm probably not going to get decent tomatoes out of my garden for another 2 years or so.
Mm,
And that is because I really feel the the responsibility and the importance of tending to soil in this way that feels really regenerative, that feels like is not going to take away from the land. Like my relationship with the land is so important that I don't want to like
mm,
make her feel like I'm like stealing from her, and
mm,
rather it's more
mm.
about like how can I add to the dynamics of the land. And
Wow.
so if we're looking at it with this context, I'm like, oh, like creativity is the soil. And and then when we tend to the soil, it then makes it so that it's going to support all of the business things that I want to do down the line,
Mhm.
you know? So, whether it is I want to grow tomatoes or I want to grow flowers or I want to, you know, grow like a native pasture, like all of that stuff is completely possible despite the fact that those are very, very divergent plans because of
Mhm.
the tending of the soil and the tending of the creativity. And so to me, it's like if we're going to talk about this, like, a polyamorous relationship between you and creativity and like your business, it's like it's all this like great cycle of reciprocity
Mm,
that um really asks us to develop relationship with like these really sort of like base foundational pieces that like we cannot
mhm,
ignore.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And these things that we might assume either consciously or subconsciously are in competition are not actually in competition. It's also not like I'm saying, well, I've given up the life of making money and having anything that looks at all like success, and instead I'm just the like living the myth of the starving artist or whatever. Like
Mm-hmm.
I I love a lot of my different creative projects. One of my favorite ones is my Substack newsletter for the birds. I love when people pay me for that. That's great. Like, I have paid subscription options, and that's like one of the most exciting things in the world to me when people sign up and pay me for my writing. Like, that's great, right? That me doing that does not discount all these other things I'm talking about. And all these other things I'm talking about do not mean that I can't have a paid model subscription model for my newsletter, right? It's like all of these things can serve the other. They're
Mm-hmm.
not in competition.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that again, it goes back to that word of reciprocity is like when we take things out of this like competitive model, we start to actually see that everything supports everything else, because
Yeah.
if I'm thinking about the soil of the garden, if I'm thinking about the soil of the business, it's like, yeah, you're going to have to develop a healthier relationship with money because we all come into this work with money wounds. You're also going
Mhm.
to have to develop a healthier relationship with boundaries because you're going to be in relationship with other humans, whether it's clients or collaborators. You're going to have
Mhm.
to develop like there's so much that goes into that soil. And a lot of times we look at other people's businesses and be like, how did you grow that amazing tomato? And it's like you didn't see the like tending and the health of the soil
Mhm.
and all the work that went into it beforehand. And I think that creativity and relationship to creativity
Mhm.
is like one of these like fundamental things. um I would say it's as important as like manure that we're adding into the soil to like make it as robust and
Mhm.
nutritious as possible.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. There's something here too. I feel like I'm not very active on Instagram right now, but I feel like I recently had a day where I just had a very strong upset opinion and needed to go and like post something about it. I think I posted something about this feeling that like it's okay if part of our creative labor is invisible. Like, which is not, I don't mean it in like a dismissive way, but I mean like so much of the good work is invisible. Like everything doesn't
Mm,
need to fit into, I'm saying, I'm using that word in a way that's like invisibility is really big. And sometimes visibility can be really small. And it's like we don't need to fit all that stuff into, again, this thing that we like can prove or sell or post about. It's like the devotion that I feel like you and I have been talking about this whole conversation has to do with a lot of things that are private or quiet or
mm,
slow, really slow. And like, how do
mm-hmm,
you make slow, good things visible? How do you like,
mm,
I can't like take pictures of all the amazing things happening underground when the soil's overwintering and there's like bugs doing great shit down there. And it's like we can't see that, but it's happening. All that stuff is
mm-hmm,
happening before the thing sprouts, right? So
mm-hmm.
it's again, this is why it's like, oh my god, all of this has to do with anti-capitalism. Like we have to value the things that we can't readily see
Yeah,
even,
yeah,
and we have to just like practice knowing that that is normal and good.
yeah. And I think that that's where I get like irritated with a lot of business coaching is it's so focused on the like the fast artificial growth of the thing that's only on the surface of the earth, instead of really
Mm,
emphasizing, hey, like you might be in a relationship with this business for like a decade or more, you know? And if that's going to be true, then can we look at what's happening as like a compounding effect, you know, instead of it being this like I gotta get out of here real quick, or like get in and get out real quick, which is sort of the
mhm,
energy that I feel from a lot of. It's why I've had to unfollow so many business coaches, like, is
mm,
because everyone's saying the same thing about how easy it is to run
mhm,
an online business. And
mhm,
like, go ahead, try. If it's so easy, go give it a try and see how easy it is, because it's incredibly hard,
oh,
and the reason why we're being sold this idea of online coaching being this like easy business is because then you'll sign up for that person's, um, workshop or program or whatever. And I'm here to tell you, like, this is hard. And I will choose this hard over and over and over again,
mm, mhm,
because it is so connected to who I am and the medicine I'm supposed to put out into the world. And there's like an
mhm,
undeniable truth in that for me, is like you get to choose your hard. And so in the context of choosing your hard, um, like which hard do you want to choose? You know, I'd say that being an acupuncturist was also hard. It was just a different kind of hard.
mm,
And,
mhm,
you know, like if we're constantly looking for just comfort,
mm,
when it comes to our work, I think you'll
mhm,
end up like taking dozens of courses from other people and, trying to escape what you might consider to be a life of suffering. But it's like,
mm.
rather, I would so much rather say, like, hey, it's going to be hard and I love this hard. The same way that I would say that about my creativity
Yeah,
and this relationship with creativity as well.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think in both cases, the hard stuff is integral to the joyful stuff too. It's like though all those things exist on the same sort of more depthful, more complex, more challenging level. Like
Hmm.
I just keep wanting to say like easy is too easy. It's like no, like that we want something like depthful and complex and rich and authentic, right? It I think like I think also what we're describing is like a realer relationship with both of these things.
Mm.
And it's so funny to me how I just feel like everything we've said we could say about business and we could say about creativity. Like this shape of how we're talking about relating to these two things. It's just so like interesting and neat to me to see how those like the mirroring between those, you know?
Hmm. Yeah.
It's surprising.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that, like, I feel like there's like a yin to my yang, yang to my yin sort of a piece here, because it's like
Mhm.
you have a more developed relationship with creativity, which is what I'm craving. And I have a more developed relationship with business, which is also what you're craving. And so, like, in this like reciprocity of a relationship between the two of us, it's like we get to support each other, um, in the thing that we have less experience with, even though we're kind of talking about the same thing, you know?
Mhm.
And like to sort of continue to like flesh out this point around the depth and the meaningfulness of these relationships is like I am now going to be entering my 40s very soon. I am no longer interested in relationships that are like dopamine inducing.
Mm.
I I'm fine with these like little dopamine hits here and there, but
Mhm.
like I want to create relationships with people, with my business, with, you know, land, with all the things that are more on the line of serotonin, which
Mm,
means that it is inherently going to be less flashy. It's inherently going to be less like, you know, uh, sympathetically sort of activating.
mm-hmm,
And um, and perhaps, you know, maybe if I circle it back to like what I was saying at the very very beginning of our conversation around this relationship with creativity, and I don't always trust it all the time. I feel like it kind of ebbs and flows, and yet I'm not like trying to like like quick start it. Like I know that I've done that before, and
mm-hmm,
you know, whether that's through, you know, feeling really disconnected to my creativity and then going on like a mushroom trip, or um, like finding artificial ways to like kickstart it that don't feel like it's coming from like an internally generated place. Um,
mm-hmm,
I'd rather just sort of like say I'm here for the long haul, you know, like
mm,
I'm ready when you are. I'll be here. Um, it's a lot of the ways in which I relate to horses as well. Like I have Winnie who's been abused in her life, and like I
mm,
have no desire to have her do anything other than be herself. And it's this like very slow, like it took me 8
mm-hmm,
months to even be able to touch her. It's been this like very very
mm-hmm,
slow progression of building trust, and I feel like that's, however this relationship with creativity unfolds, that's the kind of dynamic that I want to foster, and that's the kind of dynamic that I want to
mm,
cultivate.
mm. And that's such a good example because it's so clear and obvious to you in your relationship with Winnie. Like, why would you do anything to scare her? Why would you have unreasonable expectations of her? Why would you, it's like, oh, that we can like, you can pick that up and like place it onto your creativity as well, right? Like, oh,
Mm,
why do we, I mean, I know why we do because we like are taught and conditioned to view it otherwise, but we can practice finding that just as preposterous, right? Why would
mm-hmm,
I expect my creativity? Like, why would I expect myself to rush or to need to do anything or to have some like very specific version of success that is measurable in a certain way? I mean, why would we have those expectations of ourselves or of our creativity? It
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
seems we can practice seeing it as just as silly until it just seems silly, you know?
Yeah, 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 I love it. Well, um just to give people context, you know, I shared that you're going to be teaching a workshop for BAM. It is open to the public. And
Mhm.
so, you know, if it's before March 13th, 2024, people can sign up and hang out with us live. Um, and if it's after that time, then people can listen to the recording. And I'm sure that that's going to be just as exciting and valuable. Um, Sometimes, actually, I find that with your gatherings in particular, um, there are times when I just like want to pause the conversation to like actually like integrate it and digest it. And so I don't know, maybe the recording will be helpful for folks. Um,
Mhm.
but can you give us a little bit just like of a framework, what people can expect from that workshop, and I'll make sure that all those links are in the show notes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be 2 hours of us just being together and being really curious and sort of playing within the same world of ideas that we've talked about here, right? So thinking about, well, if I really do want to be in relationship with my creativity, what are some tangible practices I can harness in order to do that? So we're going to be thinking about collaboration, spirit of collaborating with our creativity. We're going to be talking a little bit about paying attention, the quality of our attention that we bring to our creative channel. And we'll be talking about trust as well. So, using these as our kind of like guiding qualities, we'll do some sort of group reflection, we'll generate some ideas. There will be some guided writing, which will be, for me, kind of like the highlight of the workshop, a chance for us to be curious together about these things and then turn to the page and see what's maybe showing up for us. I think, hopefully by the end of the 2 hours, we will be in a kind of nourished space and we'll feel like a little bit more intimacy with our creativity. And we will have also generated some like pretty specific and personalized ideas around how to maybe like keep unfolding that and keep tending that. So,
Mm.
yeah, whether you attend live or catch the replay, I think it'll be a pretty nourishing time. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Love it. So, as I said earlier, I'll make sure to have the correct links in the show notes. But if you just want to like hop straight over, I'm going to have all that on kathosuli.com. And if you just click down to the little bar tabby thing that says workshops, and it'll be right in there. And for those of you who want to continue to connect with Sarah, I don't know how many times I want to like stand on my own personal mountaintop and tell people to like sign up for your newsletter because I get so much out of it.
Oh,
And, one of the things that I'm in awe of is how prolific of a writer you are. I think that I tend to, uh, and maybe this is just like both of our sort of Manny Gens coming through, there's a part of me that's like, man, I thought that like I was a prolific writer, and I look at what you're putting out and the quality that you're putting out, and I'm like, I would need so much quiet time to come to these like reflections that you're coming up with. That I really truly do love your newsletter, and I'm not afraid to say that I will continue to pay for and am a paying member of your writing.
Mm, thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, that's I really appreciate you mentioning that and using that word prolific. And to be really super clear, given the conversation we just had, like that that prolificness is not me meeting deadlines or like profit driven goals. Like that has happened very organically because of my devotion to my writing practice. And
Mm,
I started that newsletter before I became self-employed. Even it was not
mm,
about it. Originally it had nothing to do with anything other than I love to write, and here's this new like venue through which for me to do that and share it regularly. So
mhm,
um
mhm.
yeah, I really appreciate that reflection.
So, my dear, before we log off, um, are there any sort of like last minute little nuggets that you want to throw in here, slash, how can people find you on the web?
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for this conversation. It's been so wonderful. And I want to thank you again for this like wonderful dynamic relationship that we're in. Coach, steward of creativity, friend, all the wonderful things in all the directions. So yeah, you're a very special and unusual person in my life as well, Kat. And yeah, people can find me obviously hanging out in the BAM community and hosting the workshop, and then at my website, sarahtheresacook.com. Um, all my stuff is linked there, including my Substack, but you can go directly to my Substack at sarahcook.substack.com. And I'll just mention quickly, since I made it live yesterday, I did create a new free resource that I'm pretty excited about. It's called Creative Resilience. It's this 4-week sort of self-guided course that you can sign up for. And it'll walk you through 4 of like the big main concepts that come up again and again in my one-on-one work with clients and in my own creative practices. just with an eye toward like building a more resilient relationship with our creativity. So
Mhm.
there's like a button on my website that you can click and snag that for free if you're interested. So pretty excited
Love it.
about that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are listening via the podcast, that is Sarah with an H and
Mm,
Teresa without an H. So it's sarahtheresacook.com. Um,
yes.
and yeah.
Thanks, Pat.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, my dear. Well, thank you so much for joining, and I hope we get to see some new and familiar faces during our workshop. And excited to continue being in this unusual relationship with you.
Yes, yes. All the unusual good things.
Yes.
Love you so much, Kat.
Love you right back, honey.